Okay, so today we're talking with Kelly Packer from the Association of Idaho Cities. Kelly, thanks for doing the interview today.
Thank you for having me.
It's my pleasure. And I wonder if first you could tell us a little bit about how you came to work at AIC and your career path, where you started out, that kind of thing.
You bet. I actually started in the government realm in 2008 when I saw some things in my city that were problematic to me. At least I thought, they could be handled better. So I got involved and ran for city council and won my race and served in that capacity for 5 years. I was actually into my second term when I ran for the legislature and won my race there and decided to resign my position as a city council member to do the legislative responsibilities. I figure if I was doing that up in Boise, somebody else could be taking care of city responsibilities. And so I did that then from 2013 through 18. And I, at that point, decided to run for lieutenant governor and not run for a fourth term of the legislature, but was unsuccessful in that bid. And the Governor Brad Little, actually appointed me to run one of his divisions after that. And I was in that capacity as the director of the Bureau of Occupational Licenses when I was approached by a couple of my mayor friends from down home asking if I would be interested in this position because it had been open for a while. I'll be honest, I laughed at him. I said, no, I really like what I'm doing. But if you want to make me an offer and talk to me, I'll be more than glad to at least entertain it. And as they say, the rest is history. So now I've been at AIC a little over 3 months and I'm really enjoying it.
Great. Well, welcome to AIC. AIC's been a tremendous friend to the School of Public Service and to Boise State for many years. And so we're always delighted to see the organization in good leadership,
Thank you. They've got a great partnership. I have definitely seen that in the few months I've been there.
Well, we really appreciate it and appreciate all you do. For folks who don't know your legislative district or your city, tell us where that was.
Okay, you bet. District 28, which was most of Bannock County. There was just a little donut hole where the university in Pocatello resides, but I had some of Pocatello, but I had most of the rural areas of Bannock County and Chubbuck, I guess, and then all of Power County as well. So great. I come from the small town of McCammon, Idaho, which is 20 miles south of Pocatello.
Yes. Well, one of the great things for me in working with all the city clerks and treasurers is I've learned the names and locations of little Idaho cities I'd never heard of before, so.
We have a lot of them. We actually, when I ran for lieutenant governor, I actually made it my goal to go to all 200 incorporated cities and the 5 reservations. And I did that. I had an RV that was wrapped with my face and name and traveled our state. And we have a cool state, really cool, with lots of little cities.
Lots of them. And AIC represents nearly all of them, right?
Actually, yes. We just sent out our dues invoices last week, I think, or a week before that. And all but 6 or 7 so far have re-upped. So hopefully we can get them all. But yes, we have most of them. Yep.
Terrific. Maybe could you tell us, just in general terms, what an organization like the Association of Idaho Cities does and what your main goals are?
You bet. First and foremost, we're the legislative arm for all of those cities. So when the cities go through their day-to-day routines and they find things that they feel would be beneficial to have fixed, updated, revamped when it comes to legislature or legislative, I guess, statutory makeup, they reach out to us with their legislative proposals. The board actually decides what to support and what not to support. And then we as their association take it to the legislature and help try to get certain things passed for them, or we oppose things if we need to, that might be detrimental to cities. And so because they have a hard time being here in Boise during the 3 months that the legislature is running, we act as that representation for them. In addition to that, we actually are their training arm. And so new elected officials, mayors, city council members, even staff, we help them with training, whether it be Budget 101 or planning and zoning. We help them understand what their responsibilities are as elected officials in their cities. So those are the two main responsibilities we have at AIC.
And just to revisit the importance of having that legislative advocacy role is because the state has nearly all the power in terms of setting up the rules and the processes. Is that correct?
Absolutely, absolutely. So the mayors and city council members can make decisions for their local areas to a certain extent in their city council meetings, and do, but quite often the legislature implements laws that affect them, whether it be a limit on what they can charge for fees or taxes, or different levies that they're allowed, to what services they have to provide or aren't allowed to provide. I mean, so there's a lot of things that happen. In fact, I was on a legislative call just yesterday. We had a Zoom call where they were talking about what liability looks like during a pandemic. You know, can cities and counties, are they immune, or do they have liability if they don't do something a certain way during an emergency? So,
well, that brings me to a question about the relationship between cities and the legislature generally. I mean, how would you characterize that relationship right now?
Unfortunately, I would say that it's a little strained, to be gracious and kind, and there's some animosity between some of the legislators and cities, unfortunately. And for me, I think it's a situation where maybe they've lost sight of just how much cities provide. In fact, we're working right now on a campaign that I'm excited. We're going to kick it off probably first part of next week, a poster and video campaign that explains what cities provide, from clean water to well-maintained streets, parks, emergency services, most importantly, and we're going to remind them in a very visual way of what we provide. I mean, one of the posters, for example, has a house just engulfed in flames with some firefighters trying to put it out, and it says, without firefighters, we'd be burned.
Yeah.
And it's true. And so, because one of the things they're trying to do right now, or that there's talks about doing, is removing some of the revenue opportunities for cities. And if that happens, then the services will be affected. And I think they've lost sight of that. Because yes, property taxes for residents have gotten out of control. There's a lot of reasons for that. It's not just because cities have been increasing costs as much as there's an imbalance between who's actually paying those taxes. I think agriculture and commercial need to step up and do more of their part. For example, I think also there's other solutions that could be formulated where people that are on a fixed income, you could put in some parameters where their Social Security income, for example, was not allowed or was not required as part of the circuit breaker documentation, and they'd be fine then. So there's things they could do that it would be different than what they're proposing, because what they're proposing right now would be detrimental to residents, I think.
And those changes that they're talking about are mostly to put some additional limitations on property taxes?
Right. And for me, and I've said this to a few of my legislative friends, they really are legislative friends, I've served with them, that we need a more holistic view of taxes in general, not just property taxes. Yes, they're out of out of sync right now, but there's a way to fix it by looking at the whole picture and readjusting some things. One of the things that I feel bad because I was part of that decision. We finally started recognizing and collecting some online sales taxes.
Yeah.
But the cities aren't getting any of that distribution.
Oh.
We put it in a little bucket that's going to be used for rainy day, and we didn't take it to the end of the road. We didn't think all the way through it, and we need to now. We need to say, okay, we're collecting X amount every year from online sales, and that should be distributed the same way as the rest of the sales tax is, because that would help offset. So things like that. Also finding ways of maybe instead of urban renewal, and I hate saying this, but instead of urban renewal, doing some type of infrastructure impact tax that would allow for schools, school maintenance and repairs, and other things that would help bring some of those other levies down that's also affecting the property taxes. So I just think there's a lot of things we could do if we looked at it holistically rather than just zeroing in on the one piece.
Yeah, I agree. One of the manifestations of a strained relationship between the state and local governments is the degree to which the state begins preempting the powers of cities. Right. Do you see any future preemption issues on the horizon?
You know, I hope not. That's a tough question. Dr. Witt, I hope not, but yes, I think there's always some people that think that's the easiest. Well, we'll just take care of it. We'll just grab that and because they can't seem to take care of it themselves. I've seen that even when I was serving there, we oftentimes forgot that, for example, school boards are elected people, positions. And we would put these restrictions on the money that we would allocate for schools and school districts when really those people were elected to be responsible to those funds and to their district, just like we are as legislators. So where do we get off thinking that we're the only ones with answers?
Yeah. Well, let me follow on that. What is it about being a legislator or a legislator in Idaho that does give that impression that preemption is the only way to deal with certain issues?
Oh, gosh. I think because it's such an intense, pressured position to be in, you are responsible for a lot of money, taxpayer dollars. And none of us like having to pay any more than we have to pay, right? And all of us that are there making decisions in Boise pay the same taxes as the next person. But we have a requirement in our Constitution to balance our budget. Excuse me. And it's a huge amount of money that we are responsible for. And yet there's a lot of services that need to come out of that pot. And so as we go through and we look at all of the various things that we're responsible for funding, we, I believe, start thinking, okay, and we want to know that we're getting our money's worth, right? If we're going to give, for example, education, and I think it's worse with education because they get about 60% of the pot. Right. I know that oftentimes you hear people say that we aren't spending enough on education, and that could be. But when you take a look at the overall budget and you do K through 12 and higher education, it is over 60% of the entire state's budget that gets spent on education. And so as a legislator, when you then take the other 40% for transportation and corrections and health and welfare and all of the other many things that have needs, and you see 60% of it going to one area, I think you do become a little bit more, well, then we should be getting our money's worth, right? And if you feel like you're not, for whatever reason, if your numbers are low in math or they're low in science or they're low in, you start thinking, fine, then we're gonna require more. We're gonna give you this money, but we're gonna expect more. And we just tend to lose sight of the fact that they're also responsible to their constituents, just like we are. We're not the end all. We're not the, you know, the stopgap necessarily, but I think we are thinking we are because of the size of that responsibility.
Yeah.
They agree with me.
The dogs agree with you.
Here, here.
One of the primary roles that you'll have as the executive director is lobbying in the legislature on behalf of the cities.
Yes.
Have you had a role where you did lobbying before?
I have, yes. Not necessarily as a certified lobbyist like I will be now, but as a legislator, obviously, when I brought my own ideas, I had to lobby those ideas, for one. But two, as the executive, or as the director for the division of licensing, we had 29 boards we were responsible for, and they brought legislation, and I was responsible for trying to get those through for the last 2 sessions, and was very blessed to be able to get a lot of good things done for the boards there. So yes, I've done that. And in fact, just yesterday, as we talked about liability reform on that Zoom call, the Judiciary and Rules Committee meeting that they had, I already lobbied a little bit on behalf of the cities and talked about the fact that, you know, in a pandemic like this, even though that we already have tort reform or tort statutes that deals with liability for government entities and schools and so forth, there is this question during a pandemic, especially in the type that we're in right now, where the CDC and the health districts and the governor are putting requirements in place that are contradictory in some cases to other responsibilities that we have statutorily, the open meeting laws, for example. If we have to, and that's what I shared on this meeting, is that if we have to provide these open meeting requirements, but we also have to social distance, and we have small facilities, and so we're now restricting who can come into our meetings, and we don't have broadband in most of the areas of our state that would allow for Zoom meetings and virtual presence, are we liable for not meeting the open meeting law, right? And there's question about that. If we close a park, or we don't close a park, if we close a library, or we don't close a library, if we close a community center, and kids don't have an after-school place to go to. I mean, there's just so much that is unknown because of the pandemic. One of the things Senator Thane, in fact, asked, he says, well, how's that any different than the flu? I says, well, the flu doesn't require us to social distance, right? So there's a big difference. And he was like, oh yeah, I guess that makes sense. I said, if there wasn't restrictions being imposed on us by others at this point, we just follow the open meeting law and call it good and let the chips fall where they may. But that's not the case in this situation.
Well, absolutely. I often tell the students in urban politics that cities are the canaries in the coal mine, right? They're the first line of service. When anything starts to go wrong, it's going to be the cities that feel that impact of,
right,
of homeless people, of crime, if crime is an issue. And in a pandemic, you know, the practicalities of how do we manage facilities, which ones are open, how do we let people in, all of that. It's not the legislature that deals with that first. It's going to be cities and counties secondarily. So,
right, and it's funny because especially in this situation, half of the world thinks we should be doing it one way, and half thinks the other. Right? Half want to wear masks, half don't.
yeah.
Rough. I mean, and so you can't win either.
Right, right. What issues do you think are going to be your biggest concern when the legislature returns and you start that lobbying on behalf of cities?
The property tax issue. It really is. And I've already started meeting with legislators in the interim, trying to educate them, because I think the biggest concern is they don't understand how funding actually works for a city. For example, our enterprise fees, the things that we charge for utilities, water, sewer and garbage services, sanitation, we can't use for anything else. It has to be in a separate account that's used strictly for those needs, whether it's maintenance, return of deposits, those types of things. We can't, there's no crossover that can be allowed by law. And so they look sometimes at the bundles of money that we have in reserves because of deposits, for example, and or because it's earmarked for future repairs or expansions. And they think, well, you've got way too much money. You've got more than you need. Well, no, we don't, because we can't use that for anything else. And so trying to educate them on how our funds actually work, what we can and can't use where, is critical, because they can't just look at our bottom line and think that we're doing well. When in actuality, those funds can't be touched, and it's just this small pot that we have for the majority of the needs the city experiences. And so trying to get them to understand that, and also to understand that if they start putting restrictions on this pot of money, because it's the only ones that we can use for the emergency services and everything else that are so critical to people, services will be affected.
Oh, absolutely. The property tax, well, the local revenues of all kinds, really, the legislature sets all the rules, but they don't have to live by those rules,
right,
about the revenues. And so it can be frustrating, I think, to city officials to, if it appears the legislature isn't really understanding what their situation is. So I can see how a good part of what you all would do would just be making sure they understand the implications of the revenue and tax decisions they make.
Right. And that's one of the reasons why we're doing that campaign, is to just give them the wake up call. And I'm going to ask them, I'm going to have those posters out and say, which one do you not want? Do you not want the clean water? Do you not want the firefighters? Do you not want, which ones don't you want? Because great, we'll cut the budget, but something's going. You tell me which one.
Yeah. Interesting. Let's see. What have I not asked you? Is there something that, let's see. So in addition to the lobbying, though, you're also running like a whole organization, and can you describe some of the conferences and trainings that you have, just in passing?
Sure, you bet. We just got done with our annual conference that we have every year in June. We had to do it all virtual this year. We usually do it live, but it was a great success. You were part of it. Thank you very much. We appreciate that. We have different tracks that help train the various individuals within a city organization, from the mayors to the council members, but also to our clerks and treasurers and city managers and administrators, etc. So we came up with a lot of different sessions that dealt with anywhere from cybersecurity to urban renewal districts and how they work, to the difference between a city manager and a city administrator, the difference between cities with those and without, to just a myriad of different things. And then we also had some breakouts where large cities and small cities were able to network and talk and learn from each other and brainstorm together. The difference between maybe some of our tourist towns and cities to our more urban and bigger cities. And so just a myriad of different things. I know this fall, for example, we've got some additional training. Typically in the spring, we do a training where we do updates on legislative changes and how it affects cities and what they're going to have to maybe revamp or worry about. And so we train them on those legislative changes in the spring. Then we have our annual conference that just deals with a whole bunch of topics in smaller bite-sized pieces, I guess. And then in the fall, we try to focus on something specific each year. The election year, we do more of your 101 type things, budgets and things like that for our brand new people. But on the off year, which is this year, we actually try to focus in on something that maybe would be helpful, something maybe where we felt like it's we've had a deficiency for a while. This year, for example, it's planning and zoning. We're gonna it's been a while since they've updated their planning and zoning manuals, so we're getting that all done, and we're gonna do a planning and zoning training throughout our regions to help them with more future long-term thinking and trying to have a more thoughtful approach to the changes that their cities need.
Yeah, planning and zoning is tough. I mean, first of all, it's wildly technical, and the potential downside to messing it up is costly, right? With lawsuits.
Very, you bet.
Yeah, and you know, a lot of cities have a comprehensive plan, but whatever's happening over here with actual zoning has nothing to do with whatever the planning document said. So getting those two things to talk to each other is often very challenging. So that's a great topic. That's good. And I will be participating also in the clerks training in September, of course.
That's right. Yes, we do have that coming up. That's also going all virtual instead of live. So
yes.
Yeah.
Well, you know, we'll make do. Maybe this is the way we do everything forever, and maybe in a little while we'll go back to whatever normal looks like. So that's great.
I think we'll always have a little bit of a hybrid mix from now on, would be my guess. Now that we've seen that what we can do.
Yes.
I think that, and I'm actually kind of excited about that, because when we do our annual conference, for example, it's hard for some of our smaller cities, again, because they don't have the funding to attend here in Boise. And so being able to have that virtual arm as well, I think will allow for us to access more of our cities and help them even more than we have in the past.
Well, we know that, I mean, we did a survey of all the city clerks that attended the training a year or so ago, and for so many of them, they're the only paid employee, right? So to go to a conference means you are sometimes literally closing City Hall for a couple of days for someone to come to training. So the having some or all of the training online, you know, helps that group of people be able to stay at work and get some training. And Kelly, thank you so much for spending some time with us today. I know you're very busy. I appreciate you taking the time to talk with us. And best of luck with the session and with AIC as you know, get settled in there and get everything organized.
Thank you very much.
Take care.
Pleasure to be here this morning.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.